Hello everyone, this is Go Against the Tide TV, Idź pod prąd, and the special program. We are here with Ivan Belostenko, and we have a special guest, Mr. Tomas Sandell, the founding director of the European Coalition for Israel, Finnish journalist. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, it's a pleasure to be on the program.
And we have a first question about your organization, EC4I. Could you say something more about the aims of your organization and so on?
Yes, well, first of all, this organization was founded in 2003 at a situation where we saw that anti-Semitism was on the rise in Europe again, and there's a particular story that I remember, and that was how Elie Wiesel, the late Elie Wiesel, spoke at a conference in Brussels, and he said, why is it that still almost 70 years after the World War, when there is a rise of anti-Semitism, it's only the Jewish people who are reacting. He said, where are all the others? Where are the Muslims, the Christians, the agnostics? And this spoke to me, and just a few months later, I met him again in Berlin, and I was able to announce the creation of what I would call a coalition of all the others. Yeah. And that means that we, who are not necessarily part of the Jewish community, we have a responsibility to speak up and stand on the side of the Jewish people, but also the state of Israel. So the objectives are two things. First of all, to combat the rise of anti-Semitism, also by not only being against something, but also to clearly explain how we have been blessed by the presence of Jewish communities in Europe, and that's very easy to substantiate. But then also not only say that we are against anti-Semitism, because today everyone would, technically speaking, say that, but also we are very strong on the state of Israel. So we want to promote good relations between Europe and Israel. And obviously today, in particular from an EU perspective, there are problems, and we need in Europe to learn from history and become real friends of Israel.
Mm-hmm. That's actually, we skipped our next question, but because it's partially answered, how do you get involved with the organization? But while you mentioned that thing with the fact that most of the leaders are against the classical understanding of anti-Semitism, but the question actually I had is, we see that they openly, they commemorate the various dates of various events in anti-Semitism, but we see that while they do condemn anti-Semitism in its classical form, we notice that by their deeds, some of the things they do, the main leaders and also the smaller leaders of the European nations, they actually are anti-Semitic. And we can mention the lobbying for against the embassy move to Jerusalem, the failure to condemn terrorism both in the Middle East and in Europe, and so and also failure to recognize other things like solid legal foundation for the state of Israel, which you mentioned as well. Have you noticed this dissonance, this phenomena, that while they accept that anti-Semitism is not okay in this classical form, their deeds don't follow?
Absolutely, and I have a very good example of this. I'm afraid I can't reveal the identity of the high EU official who I'm going to quote, but this happened on, it was actually the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and I presented myself to a very high EU official, and I said, this is my name, I represent European Coalition for Israel. And he looked at me and he said, and what does Israel has to do with any of this? And I think it's a ridiculous comment, because, and we spoke about it, and I said, listen, if there would have been a state of Israel created in 1938, as was agreed already in San Remo 1920, millions of Jews could be alive today. So I think that people, and I'm sure he regrets his comments very much today, but people very often try to distinguish between, on the one hand, European Jewry, and you said, we react when Jews are being attacked on the streets of Paris or Brussels, But at the same time, when Jews are being killed in Jerusalem, within Israel, it's a very different standard, and sometimes there's a cold silence and ignorance, and I believe again that this, for me, it reveals sadly that the European leaders have not really learned the lessons of the Holocaust.
Very interesting.
And how can you see the role of Poland in your organization and maybe in general in this process on developing bonds between Israel and Europe?
I think Poland is in a very strategic role, play a very strategic role in bringing Europe closer to Israel. And we've always been in very close contact at the work that we do at the United Nations with the mission of Poland. We've known the last 4 Polish ambassadors, and they've always been very openly friendly with Israel. Obviously, knowing the history of Jewry in this country, I think there is a historical reason why Poland should be the one at the forefront of promoting good relations. And I think also, we watch when the governments come together in the European Council in Brussels, and we know that Poland is always one of the strongest friends of Israel when decisions are being made in Brussels. And I think if it wasn't for Poland and maybe a few other countries from this region, things could be a lot worse in Brussels at the moment. So I have high hopes that Poland would really be the country that would bring Europe and Israel closer together. And of course the Warsaw Summit is a good first step in this direction, but I hope there will be a good follow-up.
You're reading in our minds, because I was about to ask about the Warsaw Summit. So what are your impressions so far from what happened there and also from what followed to the summit?
Yeah, first of all, and I made a video about the preparation for the Warsaw Summit, where I stated very clearly in Brussels, I said, listen, now is the time to leave, conflicts behind, and for Europe to really come alongside the US and Poland in this Warsaw Summit. Because I remember I made this statement on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I reminded the audience, I said, listen, still today there is a UN member state calling for the destruction of the Jewish state, using the same language as Adolf Hitler. Mm-hmm. And we just seem to sort of, don't want to hear what he's saying. And on the contrary, like was the case with the German president, to send his congratulations on the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. How could this be? So I think that this really gave a unique opportunity for the European nations to come strongly together and say, listen, we had enough of terrorism, this is something we cannot accept. If Poland takes the initiative, wonderful, we should all be there. But sadly, as we know from the EU side and with Mogherini at the forefront, they did not want this summit to happen, which I think is very unfortunate. I think it was in many ways a good summit. Obviously, the fallout afterwards is something which is problematic, and I'm sure we have reasons to analyze that more in detail.
Yeah, we want to ask you about the background of this conflict, Polish-Israeli conflict, and we are thinking who are interested in, conflicting Israel and Poland. What is your opinion?
Yeah, and it's absolutely true that there were very strong forces at work to, first of all, to prevent the Warsaw Summit from happening, then to derail it, and I think now also then to try to minimize or try to hurt the conclusions of the summit. I also think, as we know, that media has this tendency to I think in particular now to be very critical of the US president and the Israeli president. And I'm sure that there are journalists who are just looking for the right soundbite, even if it's said and it's taken out of context, just to be able to, in some way, to discredit some of these leaders. In this case, Netanyahu, president of the US, but also the Polish government. So I think it's very unfortunate what happened. I believe, as a very strong friend of Israel, that the comments made by the Israeli Prime Minister and then the Foreign Minister, they were not helpful, they were not constructive, they were not factual. But I'm also hopeful, because we've seen this before, that, give it a few weeks, a few months, we'll be able to normalize the relations again. And this is where an organization such as ours want to be instrumental and try to see, well, what will it take to bring the parties together again? Because Israel and Poland, they need each other. Yeah. The US needs Poland, and I think these three countries together have a critical role to play in international relations right now. So we shouldn't be distracted by this comment, which I think for the moment is very big news, but I think we'll find a solution.
And have you, just coming back to that question again, have you noticed a certain, I don't know, maybe don't want to imply, but any countries or any specific sides of this, that support this conflict, that really looking for it to, inflame and increase?
I would, looking at member countries, again, you see the countries who didn't come. I mean, why didn't Germany come? Why didn't France make this a priority? I think that's problematic, and it needs to be pointed out. But of course, looking at the European Union with Federica Mogherini at the forefront, I mean, she was clearly very openly against the conference on day one. And anything that would jeopardize the relations with Iran, she would be the first person to be against that, which I think is completely in contradiction with our so-called European values and principles. So I think in this case, Poland was on the right side of history on the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, to be able to host such an important event. And we have to look at it also outside of the context of the EU. I mean, when did we last see Arab countries sit down with an Israeli head of state to break bread and find a common cause? I think this is unprecedented, and I think it's been evaluated in media so far. And I want to congratulate the Polish government for having had the courage to take this initiative.
And we want to talk about the American plan about the peace in the Middle East. We know that Donald Trump is planning to reveal this idea. We don't know the specific details of the plan, but do you have some comments on this? On maybe EC4I have its own peace conception in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think always when we hear about these grand schemes, these grand peace plans, I have a tendency to be a bit skeptical, because we know, I think there hasn't been anything very new or innovative for the last 30 years. When we speak about the peace plan, we basically know to 90% what the parameters are. And I know people who have more of an insight into this than I would have as a European, what the thinking is, and there are no reasons to believe that this peace plan would be very different from what has been presented before. So as much as I am a supporter of the current US administration, I think when it comes to the peace plan as it stands now, I would give myself the right to be critical if it is so, for example, that Jerusalem would be divided. I think this is unacceptable. It's illogical. It would go against the values and principles of the whole international community, and it would also go against the legal foundations, legal commitments made to the State of Israel, going back to San Remo of 1920. And we've always been very open about this. And I think in this way we are perhaps, this is what distinguishes us as an organization. We always said that Jerusalem should stay united. You know, we passed the time in history behind where we would divide cities, you know, it divided Berlin, divided Belfast, so on and so forth. I think as a general principle for our organization is to support the State of Israel, we support the democratic process. If there is a consensus in Israel for a particular peace agreement, it's not our sake to educate them and say, well, this is the way you should do it. I mean, the Israelis there on the ground, they know what they can live with. But I think nevertheless, as a matter of principle, these are some parameters for us, which are, you know, a line in the sand to say, I think it would be counterproductive to divide Jerusalem. Jerusalem should be the capital of the Jewish state. It should be the united capital.
Petition?
Petition, and maybe first we just want to ask you something more about, because your organization, you revealed the secret efforts of German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who suggested the member countries of the EU not to move the embassies to Jerusalem. And could you tell us something more about this, and why did you reveal this?
Well, first of all, these were things, it's like the elephant in the room. I'd spoken to enough government officials from these particular countries and diplomats to hear what was happening, you know, and I was even surprised that it wasn't more widely reported. I don't think it was a big news. I thought everyone knew about it, so I just stated the obvious and said that, you know, listen, how can it be that the leader of Germany would be the country to take the lead and to block such a move against the interest of the Jewish people? I think it's just very, very extraordinary. And again, if you because I am a bit worried about Germany and the way Germany is going and how it's putting its past behind. We saw another example just a few days ago when the current president of Germany had sent his congratulations to Iran again after the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. I mean, how can it be? It's like, well, the good thing is that in Germany, of course, democracy works, and you know, media had picked it up, and I think it was Bild who really exposed it for what it was, and they were ashamed to be Germans, knowing that their president is going in this direction. So I believe, and my message is really to Poland and to the other V4 countries, not to be bullied by anyone. I think Poland and I think these countries here have more of a moral clarity. They know what it is to live under a totalitarian regime. They don't need anyone from Brussels to tell them what to do and what they cannot do. So I think this is something that I'm against in principle. Honestly, I think that for the European project really to succeed, we have to have a deeper understanding of the lessons of the Holocaust. If any continent should be the best friend of the State of Israel, it should be Europe. Instead of having a policy which we have today, which we are funding a Palestinian Authority, which is paying pensions to convicted terrorists, funding Palestinian textbooks which are inciting to violence and to hatred, It's just unbelievable, and we as citizens have to make our leaders accountable and say this is unacceptable. So I hope with the WWII and some other countries in Europe that there would be, if there's not complete unity, but at least there would be a strong bloc that would say that enough is enough. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that there are other countries such as Austria, just to mention one example, that is very much on this line. And I hope that there could be more. I mean, Italy in this respect is also re-evaluating its policy towards Israel. And ahead of the EU elections, I hope that there will be more countries that will have the courage just to step out and say, listen, this is the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. These are the reasons why we want to do it. And we didn't like it when Moscow were trying to tell us what to do, what we could not do. It shouldn't be any different in this respect with Brussels. Not that I want to compare Brussels with Moscow, but to some extent, I think there is a point to be made.
And finally, we want to talk about our petition that we've started a couple of days ago to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, in requesting him to assist Poland and the Polish government to obtain reparations for World War II from both Germany and Russia. As we all know, neither Germany nor Russia ever paid any reparations for what they've done, and we know that there has been a pact of Ribbentrop-Molotov between them, and they've all both together invaded Poland. And so we've started this petition not just because it's the right thing to do and it's moral, but also because we, like you mentioned, want to see Poland become sort of similar to what Israel is in the Middle East for USA in Eastern Europe, in the Eastern Bloc, to be a solid partner. And like you mentioned before, that Poland needs to take the lead on the embassy move as well. So we started this petition to I guess you can say, push back on these efforts to destabilize the region and weaken the partners of US here in this region. What do you think about this idea? Is that?
Yes, I think there's a moral case to be made, and I don't know history that well, so that Poland was not compensated in any way, which is remarkable and which is interesting. Of course, coming from Finland, we have an unsettled case with our eastern neighbor as well. I'm not sure there would be anyone in Finland as optimistic as to expect that Russia would acknowledge that they made mistakes and there would be something to be paid. It was of course the other way around in Finland, Soviet Union. We had to pay a huge war debt, which we also managed to do by 1952. But no, I think it's good, if for no other reason, just to bring this on the table as a matter of discussion and evaluation. And it would be interesting, especially to hear the comments in Berlin. I think when it comes to Moscow, I'm perhaps less optimistic. But yeah, we never know.
Of course, an important part of this petition as well is our intention, because we are aware that part of these people who suffered at the hands of Germany and Russia were Jews, Polish Jews. So we also have an intention to then share part of these reparations with the Jewish people, both in a direct form and also possibly in some form of purchase of weaponry and military equipment and things like that. So that's also part of the idea. I think that might be important to your organization as well, because you deal with, with that part and with the Jewish people to bring that up. Because that's the just thing to do.
I can only say good luck.
Thank you. And maybe the last question, maybe some kind of personal. You're Finnish, and could you see similarities between Polish people and your people? And how could we develop friendship between our nations? Yeah.
Well, obviously, when it comes to geography, we have, I think in the faith of Finland has always been in the hands, not in Helsinki, but in Petersburg at the time and later Moscow. So of course we know what it is to live with a large neighbor and very influential neighbor. I think Polish-Finnish relationships have always been very good. I recall playing ice hockey against Poland, and I think there we would at least succeed, but there are other things where Poland has been more successful. What I think, what I have a particular interest in is, of course, that the work we do in Brussels and at the United Nations to have a closer link with Poland. We work very closely with the Polish government in New York, also in Brussels, and just to see how we could also there be a voice for Christians in Poland who care for Israel. And that's partly why am I here this weekend, just to speak with a group of leaders who are interested in these issues. So as much as I'd like our countries, Finland and Poland, to get closer to each other, I hope that in Europe these voices, because there are not too many who have an understanding of the importance of Israel, that they would come together. But also, and I applaud you for that you take it seriously, you have your TV channel, and this is very central to everything you do, but that our voice would be amplified, because this needs to be heard in Brussels, it needs to be understood also in the US, that there are still those in Europe that are subscribing to the same Judeo-Christian values as so many other parts of the world are in high demand. So we need to stick together and become stronger by being united.
And we will end at this beautiful comment. Tomas Sandell, the founding director of the European Coalition for Israel, was our guest. Thank you so much for the interview. Very interesting talk. And we will, I think, following this subject, and please subscribe our channel on YouTube. Idź pod prąd, go against the tide. Thank you so much.